Every evening at exactly 6:47 p.m., 4-year-old twins Elijah and Amara disappeared. Not 6:45, not 6:50, always 6:47. Their widowed mother, Grace, noticed the pattern 3 weeks ago. At first, she brushed it off. Children wander, children explore. But the precision unsettled her, the same minute, every single day. And exactly 30 minutes later, they returned. Barefoot, dirt smudged on their toes, soft smiles on their faces. And something else. Peace. Her children, who had been restless and clingy since their father Marcus died 8 months earlier, came back calm, grounded, whole. That was what tightened Grace's chest. Grief had hollowed their home, yet somehow her babies returned filled. "Where do you go?" Grace asked one evening, kneeling to their level, searching their eyes. "Just play, Mama," Amara said, her twisted braids catching the porch light. Outside, Elijah added, squeezing his sister's hand tighter. They never said more. And Grace, drowning in her own grief, juggling 2 jobs just to keep the lights on, had been too exhausted to push. Until the 22nd evening, Grace stood at the kitchen window and watched as Elijah slipped into his denim overalls, the same pair his father had bought him, and reached for Amara's hand. Amara wore her pink checkered shirt again, the one she insisted on wearing even though it had grown too small. They looked impossibly tiny, so vulnerable, so alone together. Something broke inside Grace. She grabbed Marcus's old cardigan, the one that still smelled like him if she pressed it to her face, and quietly followed them. The twins walked down the dirt path toward the abandoned Thornhill farm. Grace's heart lurched. She had warned them about that place. The barn was old, unstable, dangerous, but they walked with purpose, like they were being called, like someone was waiting. "Please, God," Grace prayed silently, "please let them be safe. They're all I have left." The barn came into view, its rusted roof glowing in the golden evening light. Grace hid behind the old oak tree near the fence, the same tree where Marcus had proposed 9 years earlier. The twins didn't hesitate. They walked straight inside the barn. Grace waited, her heart pounding, then followed. As she stepped through the doorway, the smell hit her first. Old wood, dust, and something unexpected. Coffee. Someone was brewing coffee. Her eyes adjusted to the dim light. And that was when she saw him. In the center of the barn sat an elderly man in a wheelchair. For a moment, Grace couldn't breathe. He was thin, hunched slightly forward, his hands resting on a worn blanket across his lap. His hair was silver, his face lined deeply by time and sorrow. A small camping stove hissed quietly beside him, a dented kettle steaming gently. And arranged on hay bales in front of him, like children at story time, sat Elijah and Amara. "Your daddy," the old man was saying softly, his voice trembling, "was one of the finest men I ever knew." Grace's knees nearly gave out. She recognized him then. Uncle Thomas Thornhill, her grandmother Ruth's younger brother, the one who stopped coming to family gatherings after Ruth died, the one people whispered about, said had moved away, said was too broken by loss to stay. But he hadn't gone anywhere. He was here. "You knew our daddy?" Elijah asked, his small voice full of hope and aching need. "Knew him, child," Uncle Thomas replied. "Watched him grow up. He used to come to this barn with your mama when they were dating. Sat right where you're sitting now." The old man lifted a trembling hand and pointed to the hay bales beneath the twins. "He asked me about the land," Thomas continued, "about building something that lasts, about being the kind of man his children could be proud of." Grace pressed her fist against her mouth to stop herself from sobbing. "Mama doesn't talk about Daddy much," Amara said quietly. "It makes her too sad." Grace's chest cracked open. "I know, sweetheart," Uncle Thomas said gently, his eyes shining. "That's why you come here, isn't it? Because you can talk about him here." Both twins nodded. "Tell us again," Elijah whispered. "Tell us about the day we were born." Uncle Thomas wheeled himself closer, his movements slow and careful. "The day you two were born," he began, "your daddy called me from the hospital. It was 3:47 in the morning. His voice broke. He was crying so hard he could barely speak. He said, "Uncle Thomas, they're here. They're perfect. I have a son and a daughter, and I don't know how my heart doesn't burst." Elijah stood and walked toward him, placing his small hand on the old man's knee. "Our daddy loved us," Elijah said softly. "Oh, child," Uncle Thomas whispered as tears spilled down his cheeks. "Your daddy loved you more than life itself, more than breathing." Amara joined them, wrapping her arms around the old man. Grace watched as her children, her grieving babies who had been trying so hard to be brave, finally broke. They cried the way only children can. Honest, unfiltered. 8 months of missing poured out all at once. "I miss him," Elijah sobbed. "I miss him so much. I can't remember his voice anymore." Uncle Thomas reached beside his wheelchair and picked up his phone. "I've got his voice, baby," he said. Videos, pictures, stories for days. Then he looked up, and his eyes met Grace's in the shadows. Grace stepped forward, unable to hide any longer. "Thomas," she whispered. The old man's breath caught. He squinted toward the sound, then his face crumpled as recognition washed over him. "Grace," he said, voice breaking. "Baby girl." She hadn't heard him call her that since she was a child. Her legs carried her forward before she could stop them. Tears streamed freely down her face. "Uncle Thomas," she sobbed. "I thought you were gone. After Grandma Ruth died, you just disappeared." "I was grieving," he said simply. "I lost my sister. Then I lost my wife 6 months later. I couldn't stay around people anymore." He gestured around the barn. "So I came back here, where Ruth and I grew up, where the family began." Grace finally noticed the small living space tucked into the corner. A narrow cot, a folded blanket, stacked cans of food, a lantern hanging from a nail. "You've been living here?" she whispered. "A year now," Thomas nodded. "Alone. Completely alone. Until 3 weeks ago." Grace's breath caught. "What happened 3 weeks ago?" she asked, already knowing the answer. "These two," Thomas said softly, smiling at the twins. "They showed up barefoot, holding hands, walked right in like they belonged here." He laughed weakly, asked me why I was crying. Grace's hand flew to her mouth. "I told them I was sad," Thomas continued, "because I missed people, missed family." His voice trembled. "And this little one," he reached out gently, touching Amara's braids. She said, "We can be your family. We're really good at it." Amara smiled shyly. She said, "We're twins, so you get 2 for 1. Grace broke down completely. "And this one," Thomas said, ruffling Elijah's hair, looked at me real serious and said, "We lost our daddy, so we know about being sad. You can be sad with us." Grace sank to her knees. "That's why they keep coming," she whispered. "Yes," Thomas said. "Every day at 6:47. That's when the light is prettiest." He pointed toward the slats in the barn wall. "That's when your Grandma Ruth used to sit right there and watch the sunset when we were kids." Golden light streamed through the boards, illuminating floating dust like tiny stars. "Your twins brought life back into this barn," Thomas said quietly. "Back into me." Elijah pulled free and ran to his mother, wrapping his arms around her legs. "I'm sorry we didn't tell you, Mama," he said. "But Uncle Thomas has stories about Daddy. Real stories. And he doesn't cry every time," Amara added softly. "Not like you." The words weren't cruel, just honest. Grace gathered them into her arms, shaking. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't want you to hurt." "But we already hurt, Mama," Amara said gently. Grace looked up at Thomas and finally understood. They hadn't disappeared. They had found exactly where they were needed. Grace wiped her tears and took a steady breath. "You're right," she said softly. "We hurt, all of us." She looked at Thomas. "I couldn't say Marcus's name without breaking. I thought silence would protect them." Thomas nodded. "They needed stories," he said. "Happy ones, funny ones, stories that let them touch him without drowning." He swallowed. and I needed them. I was ready to give up. Amara tugged Grace's cardigan. "Can we keep coming, Mama? Please." Grace looked at her children. Really looked. Their eyes were bright, lighter than she had seen in months. "Yes," Grace whispered. "But I'm coming too." Elijah grinned. "Uncle Thomas, can you tell the story about Daddy and the barn cat? And the one," Amara added, "about when Daddy asked if he could marry Mama." Thomas laughed, a rusty sound that grew stronger. "I can tell you every story I've got." They sat together on the hay bales, Grace between her children, Thomas close by. As the 647 light poured in, the barn filled with gold. "Your daddy came here on a Tuesday in spring," Thomas began. He was nervous as a cat in a room full of rocking chairs. The twins giggled. He practiced his speech all the way here, then forgot every word when he saw your mama. Grace smiled through tears. "He asked me if loving someone this much ever stops hurting," Thomas said. "I told him love doesn't stop hurting. It teaches you how to carry the ache." The twins leaned in. Grace felt something shift. The grief didn't vanish, but it loosened. They stayed until the light faded and the kettle cooled. Before leaving, Grace hugged Thomas. Long, fierce. "I didn't know you were here," she said. "I didn't know you were suffering." "We were all suffering alone," he replied. "We don't have to anymore." Outside, the twins held their mother's hands. The path felt shorter. From that evening on, 647 became a gathering, not a disappearance. Stories replaced silence. Laughter found room beside tears. Sometimes healing arrives barefoot. Sometimes family returns from places you forgot to look. They return the next day, and the next, sometimes bringing bread, sometimes bringing questions. Thomas answered patiently, telling how Marcus laughed too loud, loved fiercely, and never left a promise unfinished. Grace listened, learning her husband again through another's memory, discovering corners grief had hidden. The barn slowly changed. Windows were mended, a chair appeared. Coffee steamed at 647. Neighbors waved. The path wore smooth beneath small feet. What was broken learned a gentler shape. Loss remained, but it no longer ruled the room. It shared space with warmth, with family found and kept. And when the sun slipped through the boards, Grace knew this was how love survived, by being spoken, shared, and carried forward together. In time, birthdays returned, laughter echoed, and evenings held meaning again, proving that even after loss, love finds ways to gather, heal, and stay, especially when hearts choose honesty, remembrance, and the courage to walk together into light, softly, patiently, always as families do when hope is allowed to breathe, and love keeps showing up. Moral of the story: grief doesn't mean love is gone. It means love is still looking for a place to speak. Sometimes children understand what adults are too broken to say, that remembering isn't weakness, and talking about the ones we've lost doesn't reopen wounds, it helps them heal. When we share stories, we keep love alive. And when we allow others into our pain, we discover we were never meant to carry it alone. Healing begins the moment we stop hiding our hurt and start sharing our memories. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more emotional stories that stay with you. Comment below, have you ever reconnected with someone you thought you'd lost, or found healing in an unexpected place? Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today.